She needs help, Daddy. A 9-year-old girl said those 4 words in a small diner at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in October. And for a long second afterward, nothing in the room moved. Not the waitress behind the counter with her coffee pot tilted halfway to a cup. Not the old man in the third booth who had stopped chewing his toast. Not the cook through the pass-through window, his spatula hovering above a strip of bacon that had just started to curl. The little girl wasn't shouting. She wasn't scared exactly. She was just certain. Certain in the way children are certain about things adults have learned to pretend they can't see. At the counter, another waitress stood frozen. A man's hand was wrapped around the sleeve of her grey uniform. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the diner brought in over 3 slow weeks. His hair was the color of brushed steel. His fingers were not hurting her, but they were not letting her go. He was her father. She had run from him 2 years ago, and she had spent every day since praying he would not find her. He had just found her. What happens in the next 3 minutes in this diner on the edge of a town most people have never driven through will change 4 lives forever. A father will lose an empire he spent 40 years building. A daughter will stop hiding for the first time in her adult life. A veteran will answer one last call to duty, though no one in uniform will ever thank him for it. And a little girl who believes there is a right thing and a wrong thing in every room will watch her father prove it. But first you need to understand how all of them ended up in the same diner on the same morning. So let me take you back. Naila Brown unlocked the front door of Hank's diner every morning at 5:30. The way she had for the past 2 years. The way Hank had asked her to the day he handed her a spare key and told her not to drop it down a storm drain. The sky was still black when she arrived. Just the first suggestion of grey pressing against the tops of the pines behind the gravel parking lot. She would walk in, flip the overhead lights on one switch at a time. Hank hated the sudden blaze of all of them at once, said it was hard on an old man's eyes, and start the coffee. 2 urns, regular and decaf, always regular first because the early truckers wouldn't touch the decaf if you paid them. She was 31 years old. Her skin was a warm, deep brown. Her hair was kept in 2 simple twists that disappeared under the brim of the old paper cap she pinned on before the breakfast rush. She was tall, but she had learned over 2 years of walking between narrow booths with coffee pots in each hand to move like someone smaller. The careful sideways shuffle of a woman who did not want to bump anyone ever for any reason. The uniform was grey polyester washed so many times the seams had gone soft. The apron was white and clean. Her sneakers were black and scuffed at the toes. She wore no jewelry except a thin silver chain her mother had given her when she was 16. And she kept that tucked under her collar where no one could see it. The diner itself was called Hank's because Hank had opened it in 1984 and saw no reason to get clever about the sign. The booths were red vinyl patched twice with red tape of not quite the right red. The floor was black and white checkered linoleum that had surrendered its shine a long time ago. The ceiling fans turned on a slow wobble. The jukebox still worked. And it still had Patsy Cline and Merle Haggard on the rotation. Nobody had updated it in so long that young people mistook it for a prop. Naila loved this diner more than she had ever loved anything made out of glass and chrome in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her ritual was the same every morning, coffee first. Salt shakers next, she checked them by lifting each one to the light because a salt shaker with a clogged cap was a customer's bad morning. Ketchup bottles third toppled upside down so the ketchup would settle to the lids overnight. Silverware rolled in napkins, 10 at a time, her fingers moving without her thinking. Then the quiet part, the part she liked best. For about 20 minutes before Hank came in around 6, before the first truckers arrived, and the first farmers and the first highway workers headed out to patch potholes on Route 9, Naila would sit on a stool at the counter with a cup of coffee and a paperback from the library. She read everything. She didn't have opinions about genre. Whatever the librarian, a gentle white-haired woman named Miss Ruth, thought she might like that week was what Naila read. Miss Ruth had figured out about 6 months in that Naila was not going to talk about her past. So Miss Ruth never asked, she just handed her books. Sometimes a Toni Morrison, sometimes a biography of Harriet Tubman, sometimes a mystery novel with a dog on the cover because Miss Ruth believed everyone needed to read a dog mystery now and then. Nyla rented a studio apartment above a laundromat 3 blocks from the diner. The rent was $425 a month. An insult to urban renters. A fortune to her. She kept a glass jar on her kitchen counter where she dropped her tip money every night. On the side of the jar, she had written in blue Sharpie the word cushion. Not savings, cushion. Because the whole reason she kept it was so she would never again be in a position where one bad week knocked her flat. Hank had hired her with a single conversation. She had walked in on a September afternoon 2 Septembers ago. Thin, tired, her hair uncombed, her eyes red from a night spent at a Greyhound station. She had asked him for a job. He had looked at her hands, which were shaking so badly she had put them in her pockets. He had looked at her face, which was composed anyway because composure was the last skill she had left. He had said, "Can you carry 3 plates?" She had said, "I can carry 4. He had said, "Start tomorrow." He had never asked her where she came from. He had never asked her why her hands shook. He had never asked why she flinched the first time the brass bell over the door rang loudly behind her. He had just handed her an apron that first morning and said, "Table 6 needs coffee," and pointed with his chin. She had decided that first day that she would work harder for Hank than she had ever worked for her father. She had kept that promise. She had one rule for herself, and she kept it with the discipline of someone who had once been disciplined by other people. The rule was, do not talk about where you came from. Not to Hank, not to the regulars, not to Miss Ruth, not to the nice young man who drove the delivery truck, not to anyone. Because if you talked about it, it could find you. And for 2 years, 2 months and 11 days, it had not found her. Before she was Nyla Brown, she was Nyla Halbrook. The name did not sit right on her now. When she thought it, it sounded like a name from an old magazine she had thrown away. She had grown up in a stone house on 4 acres of lawn in Greenwich, Connecticut, with a fountain in the circular driveway, and a housekeeper named Gloria, who had held her in her lap when she was small because her mother was always in the East Wing practicing piano, and her father was always at the office in Manhattan. Her father was Richard Halbrook. He had founded Halbrook Industries in 1983 with a loan from his own father, and turned it over 40 years into a private holding company worth in the most recent valuation she had seen $2.4 billion. Halbrook Industries owned infrastructure firms, energy subsidiaries, a handful of regional banks, and several office towers in Hartford and Stamford. It was not famous the way tech companies were famous. It was famous the way quiet money was famous, in rooms with no windows, in handshakes that closed deals before the press release was drafted. Richard Halbrook was white, tall, silver-haired, and soft-spoken. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. He had adopted Nyla from a Liberian orphanage in 1994 when she was 2 years old, as part of what he later described at a gala as his commitment to a global family. Nyla had read as an adult the magazine profile in which her father used the phrase. She had closed the magazine and sat with her hand flat on its cover for a long time. She'd been raised as what she would later understand to be a brand asset, private school from kindergarten, piano lessons from a woman who used to perform at Carnegie Hall, French tutors on Saturdays, equestrian lessons on Sundays, summer trips to Provence, Christmas in Aspen, a debutante ball at 17 where she wore a white dress her mother picked out and danced with a boy her father had selected. Her friendships were controlled. Her boyfriends were controlled. Her college applications were controlled. She went to Wellesley because her father said Wellesley. She majored in economics because her father said economics. She came home every summer because her father said home. Her mother Eleanor had once been a concert pianist. Eleanor had married Richard in 1986 and given up her career 2 years later. She had not played in public since. She practiced 3 hours a day in a music room at the back of the house with the door closed, and no one listened. Nyla had grown up believing that music was a thing women did alone with the door closed for no one. Eleanor had loved Nyla. That was the part that made everything harder. Nyla remembered in very specific detail a night when she was 8. Her mother had come into her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and told her in a voice low enough that no one in the hallway could hear that she had one piece of advice for her daughter. Nyla had waited. Eleanor had said, "Do not let him decide who you marry." Then Eleanor had kissed her forehead, stood up and left the room, and had never said anything like it again. Nyla had remembered that sentence every day of her life since. The final break had come on a Thursday in August, 2 years and 2 months ago. Richard had invited a hedge fund partner named Gregory Ashford and his son Preston to dinner. Preston was 29, a Harvard MBA. The kind of young man whose teeth had been straightened at great expense. Richard had explained over the cheese course that an engagement to Preston would consolidate a significant relationship between Halbrook Industries and Ashford Capital. That the two families had discussed it, and that the timeline was September. Nyla, who was 29 herself, had put down her wine glass and said politely that she was not going to marry Preston Ashford. Richard had laughed, a short, dry laugh, and then he had slapped her. Not hard. Not hard enough to leave her bruised the next day, but hard enough that her head had turned, and her earring had come loose, and the diamond from it had bounced twice on the white tablecloth before rolling off the edge. Preston had looked at his plate. Gregory had looked at his phone. Eleanor had stood up from her chair and left the room without speaking. Nyla had sat there in the silence for 5 seconds. She had counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then she had stood up, walked upstairs to her bedroom, packed a canvas tote bag with 3 changes of clothes. Her mother's silver necklace, a paperback she had been reading, and $380 in cash she had hidden in a book on her shelf because her accounts were all joint with her father. She had walked out the side door at 11 that night. She had taken a car service to the Greyhound station in White Plains. She had bought a ticket to the farthest town in the farthest state she had ever heard of, which turned out to be a small town in the foothills of upstate New York. She had gotten off the bus, walked to the first diner she saw, and asked for a job. That was how Nyla Halbrook had become Nyla Brown. Brown had been her mother's maiden name a long time ago, before Eleanor had become a Halbrook too. Marcus Ellis came into Hank's diner every Tuesday morning with his daughter Ava, and he had done so for almost 2 years. He was 46, a black man of medium height, with a shaved head, a close-cut beard gone partly grey, and the slightly forward posture of a man whose lower back had been rearranged by an explosion. His hands were large and careful. There was a faded ropey scar that ran along the inside of his left forearm, another one along the side of his neck just under his jaw, and a third one across his right knee that he couldn't see without bending awkwardly. There were others. Most of them were under his shirt. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment. The first tour had ended clean. The second tour had ended in February of a year he had stopped naming out loud, in a stretch of road where an improvised explosive device went off under a Humvee he was riding in, and 2 of his friends had not come home. He had come home. He had spent 5 months in a hospital in San Antonio. He had gotten out on a medical retirement with a full disability rating, and he had moved back to the small town in upstate New York where he had grown up, because he knew the streets, and because his mother was buried there, and because he did not know what else to do. He had met Tanya at a barbecue 6 months after he got home. She was a middle school art teacher. She had 3 dimples when she laughed, which was more than Marcus had ever seen on one face. They had gotten married in a small ceremony at the courthouse because Tanya said weddings were a scam and he had been too tired to argue. Ava had been born 13 months later. Tanya had died of ovarian cancer when Ava was 6. Marcus had been a single father for 3 years, 3 months, and a handful of days. He did not count the days anymore. He had started counting the things Ava did instead. The first time she had read a chapter book by herself. The first time she had asked him a question about her mother that he did not know how to answer. The first time she had woken up in the middle of the night and come into his room and said she had a dream where her mother was a horse. And Marcus had said that sounded like a good dream. And Ava had said it was the best dream she had ever had. Ava was 9 now. She was a serious, quiet child. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's jawline. She wore her hair in 2 puffs on either side of her head because Marcus had learned how to do those and nothing else. And Ava had decided at 7 that 2 puffs would be her permanent look until she grew up. She was small for her age. She had a notebook she carried everywhere. A hardcover one with a horse on the front. And she drew horses in it. The horses were always mid-run, legs stretched, manes flying. Sometimes the horses had 3 legs because Ava had gotten impatient and not wanted to draw the 4th one. Marcus had once asked her why, and she had said, "The 4th leg is in the wind, Daddy." They came into Hank's diner on Tuesday mornings because Tuesday was the day Marcus picked Ava up from the school morning meeting at her Baptist church, where the children practiced choir before class, and pancakes were the reward. Ava always ordered the same thing, pancake, singular not plural, cut into squares, maple syrup on the side not poured on top, a glass of milk not orange juice. Marcus always ordered the same thing too, 2 eggs over easy, whole wheat toast, coffee with no sugar. Nyla knew the order before they sat down. She had liked Marcus and Ava from the first Tuesday they walked in, because Marcus had opened the door for his daughter and waited for her to go through first, and because Ava had said thank you to Nyla without being prompted when her pancake arrived, and because neither of them had ever in 20-odd Tuesday mornings been impatient with her for any reason at all. This particular Tuesday, Ava had asked her a question as she poured Marcus's coffee. "Miss Nyla, are you tired?" Nyla had paused with the pot in midair. She had smiled. "Why do you ask, sweetheart? Your eyes look tired." Marcus had looked up. He hadn't said anything, but his eyes had stayed on Nyla's face a beat longer than necessary, and Nyla had felt for the first time in 2 years the sensation of being actually seen, not looked at. "I didn't sleep great last night," she had said. "Thank you for noticing." Ava had nodded seriously. "Some people carry heavy things you can't see." Nyla had looked at Marcus. Marcus had smiled faintly. "That's something I said to her once. She borrowed it." "I'm not giving it back," Ava had said. Nyla had laughed. A small, real laugh. It had surprised her. She had gone back behind the counter to finish refilling the coffee urn. She had not noticed the man who walked in next, but Marcus had. The bell above the door rang at 9:58 a.m. The cold came in first. October in the foothills meant mornings that felt like something was about to happen. A front rolling through, or a storm, or a season changing overnight. A gust of air, sharp and green-smelling, slid across the tile floor and lifted the edge of the paper napkin on Marcus's table. Marcus heard the shoes before he turned, leather, hard-soled. The rhythm of a man who had walked his whole life on polished floors and never once wondered what would happen if he slipped. The soles did not belong in a diner where the linoleum had cracked, and the grout between the tiles was a darker color than it should be. Marcus turned his head a quarter inch and looked in the window's reflection. 3 men. The one in front was tall, maybe 6'2", late 50s, silver hair parted on the left. A charcoal suit with the faint pinstripe you could only see if the light hit it right. A crisp white shirt, no tie, the top button open, which was a small thing that was trying very hard to look casual. The second man was younger 30s, white with a leather folio under one arm and the face of a man who took notes on everyone he met. The third man was older and thicker and standing a half step back, the way a trained person stands when his job is to be ready. Not a bodyguard in a movie, the real kind, the kind who looked uncomfortable in a suit because a suit was a compromise between his job and his employer's aesthetic. Marcus noted all three of them in under 2 seconds. Then he looked at Naila. Naila had gone still. She was standing at the coffee station with the pot in her hand, her back halfway turned. And she had not poured a drop in the last 5 seconds. Her shoulders had pulled up toward her ears in a small involuntary motion. Her eyes had closed for half a breath. Then she opened them and turned around. Marcus watched her face change. Not dramatic, not a movie face. Just the face of a person who has, in the space of a single second, put down one version of themselves and picked up another one. Hank, who had come in at 9:30 and was standing behind the register sorting receipts, looked up. He saw the three men. He saw Naila's face. He saw the way the bodyguard was standing, and he slowly, very slowly slid his hand 6 inches along the counter until it rested on the phone. He did not pick it up. Not yet. The silver-haired man did not look around the diner the way customers do. He did not look at the menu board. He did not look at Hank. He walked without hesitation to the stool directly in front of the coffee station, and he sat down. He folded his hands on the counter. He looked at Naila, and he smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile a person makes when they have been looking for something for a long time and have finally found it. "Hello, Naila," he said. His voice was a quiet baritone, barely above conversational. Naila's hand tightened on the coffee pot. "Hello," she said. "Dad?" 2 of the regulars at the counter, old men in work jackets, looked at each other. The diner got very quiet. Richard Halbrook did not order anything. The younger man, the one with the folio, took a stool 2 seats to Richard's left and opened the folio on the counter in front of him. He set out 3 pens in a row, uncapped them, and capped them again. The bodyguard leaned against the wall by the entrance, hands loose at his sides, eyes on Naila and Marcus and Hank in what looked like a rotation. Richard let the silence stretch for almost a full minute. He was not in a hurry. He never was. That had been the first thing Naila had understood about her father somewhere around age 7. He had never in her memory been in a hurry. Urgency was for people who did not control time. He did not have that problem. "Your mother is dying," he said. He said it the same way he might have commented on the weather, or the freshness of the coffee he had not ordered. Flat, informational, impossible to ignore. Naila's breath caught, just once, almost invisibly. 6 months, Richard said. Possibly fewer. Pancreatic. It moved quickly. He watched her face. He did not blink. "She has asked to see you." Naila set the coffee pot down on the burner. Her hand was steady, but Marcus, who was watching carefully now, saw that she had to concentrate for it to be. "You should have called," Naila said. "I have called for 2 years. You don't answer the numbers I have." "Because they're your numbers." Richard smiled again, a flicker. "There and gone." "Yes." He reached inside his suit jacket. Marcus tensed, but the hand came out with an envelope. Richard placed it on the counter and slid it halfway toward Naila. "A trust transfer," he said. $8 million. I had my attorney draw it up last month. It's yours regardless of anything we discussed today. I wanted you to know that first." Naila did not look at the envelope. "What's the catch?" It was not a question. She said it like the statement it was. "You will come home," Richard said, "for the IPO. Halbrook Industries is going public in March. The story matters. You are part of the story. My daughter prodigal returned. Your mother in the photographs, alive in the photographs with her family together one last time. It is not a long ask. 3 months. Public appearances. Your face where it needs to be. After the IPO, you can do as you please. $8 million for 3 months. 8 million for a family photograph.
And if I say no? Richard's face did not change. Then we will discuss what that looks like.
Nyla looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "How did you find me?" Richard tilted his head just slightly. "I have been looking since the morning you left. There was a period of about 8 months when my investigators had no leads. They were not the best investigators. I hired new ones. They found you 11 months ago." 11 months. Yes. Why did you wait? Because I wanted to give you time to come home on your own. Nyla made a sound that was almost a laugh. It was not a happy sound. You watched me for 11 months. Yes. That's not love. That's a surveillance operation. Richard's voice dropped a half degree. It is the same thing, Nyla. You just do not know it yet. Marcus in the booth near the window slid his coffee cup a half-inch to the right. The cup made a small ceramic sound on the table. Ava, sitting across from him, looked up from her notebook. She had been drawing a horse. The horse now had 3 legs. She looked at Nyla at the counter, then at the silver-haired man, then at her father. She did not say anything. Not yet, but her pencil had stopped moving. "I'm not going home," Nyla said. She said it quietly. She had been practicing for 2 years the voice she would use in this conversation if it ever happened. She had said these words into her apartment mirror, into the bathroom mirror at work, into the space above her bed at night. She had never imagined she would say them out loud at Hank's counter on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. with a full order of bacon sizzling on the grill behind her. But she said them. Richard nodded slowly as if he had expected this. "I thought you might say that. I'm sorry about Mama." "You will be sorrier if you do not come." That sounds like a threat. It is not a threat. It is a prediction. He slid off the stool. He did not reach for the envelope. He stepped around the corner of the counter, into the narrow space where Nyla was standing, where employees were allowed and customers were not. Hank straightened up. "Sir, you can't." Richard did not look at him. "One moment." Nyla took a step back. She hit the edge of the coffee station with her lower back. Richard reached out and closed his hand around the loose fabric at the cuff of her uniform sleeve just above her wrist. He did not squeeze. He did not pull. He just held her. The way a man holds something he owns. "Nyla," he said, "you will walk out of here with me now. The paperwork we have just discussed will be honored. You will see your mother this week. You will come to the IPO in March. After that, you can return to your small life, your small town, your small restaurant. But today you will walk out of here with me, because I have flown 3 hours and driven 2 more, and I am not leaving without my daughter." The young assistant was already standing. He had moved 3 feet closer, blocking the aisle between the booths and the counter. The bodyguard had not moved. He did not need to. Hank had the phone in his hand now, but his thumb was not yet on the 9. Nyla looked down at the hand on her sleeve, the sleeve of the uniform she had been given on her second day by a man who had asked her nothing, the sleeve of a life she had chosen, that had chosen her back. That was hers the way nothing in Greenwich had ever been hers. A hand was on it. Her father's hand. She could not make her arm move. She heard very far away the sound of a coffee cup being set down on a table. A small, clean, deliberate sound like a bell in a quiet church. And behind her, somewhere across the dining room, a little voice. "She needs help, Daddy." Marcus did not stand right away. He finished chewing the bite of toast he had in his mouth. He picked up his coffee cup and took a small sip. He set the cup back down. He folded the napkin in his lap once, then a second time, and placed it on the table. He looked at Ava. She was looking at him with her big, serious 9-year-old eyes. "I heard you, baby," he said quietly. "She needs help." "I know." He reached across the table and tucked her notebook into her lap. "Ava, I need you to stay right here in this booth. Don't get up, okay? Okay, Daddy. If I say your name, I want you to get down under the table, not before. Just if I say your name. Okay. He looked at her for one more second, and he took in the shape of her face, the 2 puffs of hair, the small ink smudge on her lower lip where she had held her pencil in her mouth while she was thinking. And then Marcus Ellis, 46, medically retired 2-time recipient of the Bronze Star, father of 1 widower, did what he had been trained to do a long time ago by men who were no longer alive to see it. He stood up. He stood up slowly, not dramatically. He did not push the table. He did not let the booth squeak. He rolled up to his feet with the economy of motion of a man who had once in another country learned that standing up fast was a good way to get shot. And standing up slow was a good way to see the whole room. He saw everything. He saw the bodyguard who had not reacted yet because the bodyguard had been trained to assess whether a rising customer was a threat. And Marcus looked for about another 2 seconds, like he might just be going to the bathroom. He saw the assistant who had noticed him first and whose hand had moved 6 inches toward the inside of his own jacket, where he kept Marcus assumed nothing of use. He saw Richard Halbrook, whose back was still to him. Richard had not turned yet. He saw Nyla's face. She had seen him stand. Her eyes had gotten very large, then very focused. He saw Hank, who had the phone in his hand and was now pressing buttons. He saw Ava, who was sitting still in the booth exactly where he had asked her to sit. He took a slow breath in through his nose, let it out through his mouth, and began to walk toward the counter. His boots made almost no sound on the linoleum. The diner, which had been quiet before, got quieter. Marcus stopped 4 feet from the counter. He did not crowd. He did not square his shoulders. He stood the way he had learned to stand in rooms where the wrong posture could get a civilian killed. Hands loose, weight even, palms open but not raised. Richard turned his head. His hand did not leave Nyla's sleeve. He looked at Marcus. He took his time about it. He looked at the old army sweatshirt Marcus was wearing, washed pale, with a faint coffee stain on the chest that had survived 3 rounds of laundry. He looked at the jeans. He looked at the scuffed black boots. He looked at the scar on Marcus's neck. He looked at the faint tremor in Marcus's left hand, which was the hand that still shook sometimes in the mornings and sometimes when he was tired, and had not decided, as it did not decide now, whether to come out. Richard smiled. "Sir," he said, "this is a private family matter. Please return to your breakfast." "I'd like to," Marcus said. "I would. I had about 8 bites of toast left." "Then do so." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because you've got a hand on a woman who has asked you 3 times to let her go. She has asked me 1 time and she was mistaken. I counted 3. Richard's smile stayed where it was. It was a trained smile. It did not reach his eyes. It did not need to. He reached into his inside jacket pocket with his free hand. Marcus watched the hand carefully, and so did the bodyguard, because both of them were trained. Out of the pocket came a money clip. Richard peeled off 5 $100 bills with the thumb and forefinger of his right hand, not letting go of Nyla's sleeve, and he laid them on the counter between himself and Marcus. "For your time," he said, "and the inconvenience. Go finish your breakfast. Pay it forward to your daughter. Buy her something nice." He said your daughter with just the smallest amount of emphasis. Marcus did not look down at the money. He looked at Richard's eyes. "Sir," Marcus said, "I'm going to tell you something because I don't think anyone's told you in a while. I don't want your money. I don't need it. And the moment you put it on the counter, you made this a different kind of conversation. I was being generous. You were being dismissive. There's a difference even if you've forgotten it." Hank behind the counter had his thumb on the 9. Ava in the booth had her pencil flat on the table and her hands folded in her lap, exactly the way Marcus had taught her to do when she was in church. Richard did not pick up the bills. "Walk away," he said more quietly. "This is the last time I'm going to ask politely." "I heard you." "Then walk." "No, sir." Richard shifted his weight.
It was a small thing. Most people would not have seen it, but Marcus saw it because it was the weight shift of a man who had decided to change his approach, and Marcus had been reading weight shifts for half his life. Richard's eyes moved very deliberately down Marcus's body again, this time slower. This time not for assessment, this time for display. He wanted Marcus to feel seen in a particular way. "You served," Richard said. "I did." "Army." "Yes." "The army takes a lot of men who don't have other options." The old trucker, 2 stools down, lowered his coffee cup very slowly. Marcus did not move. His face did not change. "It does," he said. "And it takes a lot of men who have plenty of options and picked it anyway." "Which were you?" "Doesn't matter." "It does." "No, sir, it doesn't. It doesn't matter what I was before. It matters what I am now. And what I am now is a man standing 4 feet from you who is asking you to let go of her sleeve." Richard's smile tilted. "Your hand is shaking." "I know. It doesn't bother you. It used to. And your daughter." Richard's eyes moved for the first time away from Marcus. They went past him, across the dining room, and landed on Ava. Ava looked back at him. She did not look away. "Your daughter," Richard said quietly, "is watching this." "I know. A little girl like that deserves a father who chooses his fights more carefully, who does not pick arguments with men whose resources he does not understand, who comes home to her every night without incident." The tremor in Marcus's left hand stopped. It simply stopped. Hank pressed the 9. The bodyguard finally pushed off the wall and took 1 step forward, the first movement he had made in 4 minutes. Marcus did not look at the bodyguard. He did not look at Hank. He did not look at Ava because he had already promised her he would not need to, and he did not want her to flinch. He looked at Richard Halbrook. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to ask you 1 question and then I'm going to stop talking. I want you to answer it and I want you to think about your answer before you give it." Richard waited. Marcus said, "Does she want to go with you?" Richard blinked. It was the first time in the entire conversation that Richard Halbrook had been asked to consider what someone else wanted, and a very small part of his face did not know what to do with the question. The blink lasted less than a second, but Marcus saw it. So did Nyla. And something in Nyla's right arm, the arm Richard was holding, tightened. Richard recovered. The smile came back harder now. "You want to know what happens next," he said, "if you do not walk away." Marcus waited. "This diner will be inspected by a county health officer on Friday morning. He will find more violations than the owner can afford to repair. He will shut this establishment down by the end of next week." Hank made a sound low in his throat. "Your VA disability?" Richard said, "We'll enter a review process tomorrow. An anonymous complaint will be filed. Reviews take between 6 and 9 months. You will not receive payments during that time." Marcus did not respond. "Your daughter's school," Richard said, "will receive a tip from a concerned citizen about an unstable home environment. A social worker will make a visit. A file will be opened. Files once opened are difficult to close." Marcus's breath slowed. "Your landlord," Richard said, "will be contacted. Your rental agreement will be reviewed for any provision that permits early termination. 1 will be found. You will have 30 days. He let it sit. Then he said very quietly, "I do not want any of this to happen. I want to leave here with my daughter. If I leave without her, these things begin today." The diner was absolutely silent. Hank had stopped pressing numbers. The 911 dispatcher was saying something tinny on the line. Hank was not listening. Nyla, who had not spoken in 9 minutes, opened her mouth. But Marcus spoke first. "Sir," he said, "I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Did you just in front of 10 witnesses threaten a 9-year-old child?" "I did not. You threatened her school, her housing. You threatened the life I've built for her. You did it in a voice low enough that you thought nobody heard you, but every person in this room heard you, including the owner on the phone with 911.
Richard's face went still. "I misspoke," he said. "No, sir, you spoke very clearly. You just didn't know who was listening." Marcus took one step forward, just one. Not into Richard's space, into the space where Richard could feel the difference. "Take your hand off her," he said. And Nyla, at the same time, without being told, pulled her sleeve free. Richard had not expected her to do it. His fingers opened a beat too late, and she stepped back out of his reach. Nyla moved around the end of the counter. She did not run. She walked. Her legs were shaking, but her walk was not. She had learned somewhere in her life how to walk like a woman who was not shaking even when she was. She walked until she was standing next to Marcus. She was close enough to him that her shoulder was almost touching his. She was not touching him. She had not asked. But she was close enough that anyone looking would have understood where she had chosen to stand. She looked at her father. "Mama deserves better than this," she said. "She deserves to say goodbye to me, and she will. I'll come. I'll see her, but not at the house. Not with you in the room. I'll meet her somewhere she chooses. I'll wear what I want to wear. I'll stay as long as she wants me to stay, and I'll leave when I want to leave." Richard opened his mouth. "Let me finish," Nyla said. He closed it. "I'm not your daughter," she said. "I'm her daughter. I was always her daughter. You made me your asset. There is a difference, and she knew it, and I think somewhere you knew it too, and that's why you hit me." Richard's jaw tightened. "I'm not going to your IPO," Nyla said. "I'm not going to stand in your photographs. I'm not going to smile at Preston Ashford. I'm not going to give you the story you want. The story you want is a lie. And I have spent 2 years learning how to stop living inside lies. And I'm not going back inside one for 3 months for any amount of money, yours or anybody else's." She took a breath. "I know what you're going to do. I heard you. This man heard you. The whole room heard you. You're going to try to break everything he's built. You're going to try to break everything I've built. You're going to try because you believe that if you break enough of it, I'll come home." She paused. "I want you to understand something, Dad. The woman who would come home if you broke enough, she doesn't exist anymore. You broke her already a long time ago. She left 2 years ago with a canvas bag. What you find if you do what you just said you were going to do is not going to be a daughter who came home. It's going to be a stranger who burns your house down." Richard's face had gone white, not with anger, with something more complicated. "You don't have the tools," he said. "You don't know what I have." The assistant's head came up. The pens on the counter rolled a half-inch. "Mom's safe," Nyla said. "In her piano room. The combination is the day you married her. I took a folder out of it the night I left." Richard stared at her. He did not say anything. He could not. Then slowly, with a control so old and so practiced that most people would have mistaken it for calm, Richard Halbrook straightened his suit jacket. He gathered the $500 bills off the counter and tucked them back into his money clip. He picked up the envelope that contained the trust papers. He looked at Marcus. "You have made a mistake today," he said. "You do not yet know how large." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but I made it on purpose. You made yours on accident. There's a difference." Richard did not answer. He walked toward the door. The assistant gathered the pens. The bodyguard opened the door. The three of them walked out into the cold October morning. The door closed behind them. The bell rang once. Small and clean. And the sound it made was not the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a verdict. The county health inspector was a man named Douglas Perrin, and he arrived at Hank's diner at 7:42 on Friday morning. Hank had been expecting him. Hank had spent Wednesday and Thursday cleaning everything in the diner that could be cleaned, replacing every bulb in every fixture, and calling his cousin Gary, who was a retired plumber, to come check every drain in the place. Gary had come, charged Hank $20 that they both knew was a gesture, and declared the plumbing in working condition for a 70-year-old building.
It had not mattered. Mr. Perrin had a clipboard, he had a tablet, he had a list of 22 citations, most of them referencing code sections from a 1987 update that had never been enforced against any small business in the county in Hank's lifetime. He went through them in a voice that suggested he did not enjoy this any more than Hank did. Inadequate ventilation over the grill, improper grout depth in the wall tiles behind the dishwashing station, non-compliant handrail on the basement steps, a water heater with a model number that had been discontinued in 2004 and was therefore on a technicality unapproved, a fire suppression system that needed recertification 2 months earlier than was standard, a fly strip hanging 3 inches closer to food prep than code allowed. Hank had 10 days to comply or the license would be suspended. Mr. Perrin had apologized on the way out. Quietly, at the door, almost under his breath. He had said, "Someone pulled a lot of strings, Hank. I'm sorry. I did what I had to do." Hank had said, "I know you did, Doug." Nyla had watched it all from the back booth. She had come in at 6 the way she always did, and she had stayed. Hank had not asked her to leave. He had said at one point over the 3rd cup of coffee he had poured for himself that morning, "Well, that's Friday." Nyla had started crying very quietly with her face in her hands. "Hey," Hank had said, "none of that. I did this to you." "You did no such thing. He did this because of me. He did this because he's a man who thinks other people are furniture. That's got nothing to do with you." Nyla had wiped her face with a napkin. She had understood then, sitting at that back booth at 7:30 on a Friday morning in October, that her father was not coming for her directly. He had understood after 30 years of owning a daughter that frontal attacks on Nyla did not work. He was coming for everything around her. He was going to dismantle the life she had built until there was nothing left for her to stand on. And then he believed she would have nowhere to go but home. She had finished her coffee. She had gone upstairs to her apartment. She had pulled from under her bed the cardboard file box she had carried with her for 2 years, wrapped in a black garbage bag, because she had been afraid of what it was, and what would happen when she used it. She had set it on her kitchen table, and she had looked at it for a long time. She had not opened it yet. On Monday, Marcus received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was a form letter. It said that his disability rating was under administrative review. It said that per protocol his monthly benefits payments would be suspended during the review. It said that the review could take between 6 and 9 months, and that he would be notified of the outcome in writing. It did not say why. Marcus read the letter twice. Then he folded it in half. Then he folded it again. He stood in his kitchen holding the letter in his closed hand, and he looked out his kitchen window at the small square of backyard where Ava had a swing set he had put together himself the previous spring. On Tuesday, Ava's school called. The principal was a woman named Mrs. Dennison, who had known Marcus for 3 years and had always been kind to Ava. She was apologetic on the phone. She said they had received a call. Not a formal complaint, just a call from someone identifying themselves as a concerned adult in the community. The call had expressed concern about Ava's home environment, about the stability of a single father with a medical disability, about whether Ava was being adequately supervised. Mrs. Dennison said, "Ellis, I have to tell you I am required by protocol to file a referral. It's not a finding, it's a referral. A social worker will make a home visit, that's all. I'm telling you now because I want you to know it is coming, and I want you to know I have no concerns about Ava. None." Marcus said, "I appreciate that, Mrs. Dennison, thank you." He had hung up the phone. He had sat down on his kitchen chair. He had put his head in his hands. Not because he was going to cry, but because he needed to be in the dark for a minute. On Wednesday, the social worker came. Her name was Kimberly Ortez, a Latina woman in her 40s with a firm handshake and a clipboard and the polite, impersonal efficiency of a person who had done this 1,000 times and learned a long time ago not to guess in advance about what she would find. She spent an hour in Marcus's apartment. She looked at the refrigerator, which was clean and had milk and eggs and leftovers, and a drawing Ava had made on the door. She looked at Ava's room, which was tidy and had the horse notebooks on the shelf. She looked at Marcus's room, which was spare and had a made bed. She sat at the kitchen table and drank a cup of coffee Marcus made her. She asked Ava privately in the living room whether Ava was happy. Ava had said, "I'm very happy. My dad is the best dad. Do you want to see a picture of my horse?" Kimberly had said yes. Kimberly had left after 45 minutes with a report mostly written in her head. She had told Marcus at the door that she did not anticipate any further action, but that the file would remain open for 90 days as standard procedure. Marcus had closed the door behind her. He had leaned his forehead against the door for a long time. When he came back into the living room, Ava was standing in the middle of the rug with her notebook in her hand. She said, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" And Marcus, for the first time in his life, as her father, did not answer immediately. He knelt down in front of her. He took her face in his big scarred hands. He looked into her serious brown eyes, and he said, "I don't know yet, baby, but I promise you I am going to find out." Naila sat across from Marcus at his kitchen table on Wednesday night. After Ava had gone to bed, she had come over with a thermos of soup she had made in her small kitchen, because she had not known what else to bring. Marcus had opened the door in an old grey t-shirt and a pair of jeans, and he had not been surprised to see her. He had led her in. He had sat her down. He had poured the soup into 2 bowls, and they had eaten in quiet. After she had said, "I can leave town," he had looked up from his bowl. "If I leave," she said, "he'll stop. He'll go back to Connecticut. He'll stop dismantling you. He'll focus on finding me again, which is his actual game anyway. You and Ava can go back to your lives. I'm sorry. I should have done this the second he walked out of the diner." Marcus had put his spoon down. "Naila, I'm serious." "Oh, I know you are, and I want you to hear what I'm about to say because I mean it." She had waited. "If you leave," Marcus had said, "he doesn't stop. He pauses. He comes back for you in 6 months or a year or 2 years. He finds you again because he has 11 months of resources on you already, and now he's angry. He finds you in whatever town you've run to, and he does the same thing there, to whoever you happen to be standing next to at that moment. It doesn't stop when you run. It only stops when he loses. He doesn't lose Marcus. He has never lost anything." "Then this'll be a first." Naila had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had set her napkin on the table, and she had said, "There's something I haven't told you." Marcus had waited. "The night I left," Naila had said, "I went into my mother's piano room. She has a safe behind a painting. The combination is a wedding anniversary. I took a folder out of it. I've had the folder for 2 years. I've never opened it to anybody. I haven't even really read it. I skimmed it." "What's in it?" "Offshore accounts, not yet reported. 140 million in holdings that were moved before the last SEC audit in a way that, if it's what I think it is not legal." Marcus had gone very still. "And there's my mother's signature on 3 of the filings. She told me once years ago that he made her sign things she hadn't read. I didn't understand what she meant. I think I do now." "You've been sitting on this for 2 years?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I thought if I opened it up and used it, he would come, and he would break everything, and now he's here anyway." Marcus had looked at her for a long time. "Naila," he had said, "I have one question for you, and then I'm going to help you with whatever you decide. What is the cost of not using it?" She had thought about that. She had thought about her mother, who had practiced piano with the door closed for 35 years. About Hank, who had never asked her anything. About Ava, who had drawn a horse in her notebook at Marcus's table while the adults talked about something she was not meant to hear. About the life she had built in the small studio apartment above the laundromat, with the jar on her counter that said cushion. She had said, "Everyone I love."
Marcus had nodded. He had said, then tomorrow we start making calls. Marcus made 3 calls the next day. The first call was to a man named Terrence Wade, who had served with Marcus in the 75th, and now ran a small forensic accounting firm in Atlanta. Terrence had gotten out 5 years before Marcus, and had spent the years since working for the Justice Department and then going private. He took fraud cases, he traced money, he was in the quiet assessment of people who worked in his field, one of the 3 best in the country at what he did. Marcus had called him at 8 in the morning. He had said, Ter, I need a favor that isn't a favor. Terrence had said, talk to me. Marcus had told him, not everything. The outlines, a friend, a father, offshore accounts, documents, a daughter who had carried them for 2 years. Terrence had said, send them overnight. I'll have something for you by Monday. The second call was to a woman named Yvonne Price, who had worked at the SEC's enforcement division for 9 years. Before leaving to become a compliance consultant, Yvonne had been married very briefly to a cousin of Marcus's, and the marriage had ended badly, but Yvonne and Marcus had stayed in touch. Because sometimes the best thing that comes out of a bad marriage is one good friendship. Marcus had told Yvonne roughly what he had told Terrence. Yvonne had said Halbrook. Marcus had said yes. Yvonne had said, you know there have been 3 attempted inquiries into Halbrook Industries in the last decade, right? All 3 died. 1 at the regional level, 2 at the federal level. Halbrook has friends. I know. But those inquiries didn't have inside documents. If what your friend has is real, that changes the math. Send them to Terrence first. Let him verify. Then we'll talk about who in enforcement is worth a phone call now. Thank you, Yvonne. Don't thank me yet. The third call was to a man named Peter Brennan, who was a reporter at the Hartford Courant. Peter had been writing about Halbrook Industries for 11 years, in a quiet way, never quite landing the story because he had never quite had the documentation. He had interviewed Richard Halbrook 3 times and had been sent 3 fruit baskets afterward, each one larger than the last, which Peter's wife had found very funny. Peter answered on the first ring. Marcus did not say his name. He said, Peter, it's Marcus Ellis. I have something you have been looking for 11 years. When can you be in upstate New York? Peter said, tomorrow. Marcus said, good, bring a notebook. That Thursday afternoon, Nyla sat on the floor of Marcus's living room, and she opened the cardboard file box for the first time in 2 years. She took out the folder. It was a plain manila folder, slightly warped at the edges from being stored under a bed in a series of small apartments. She set it on the coffee table. Marcus sat on the couch behind her. Ava was at a friend's house for the afternoon. Nyla opened the folder. She started to read. Marcus did not read over her shoulder. He waited. After about 40 minutes, Nyla looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. She said, it's worse than I thought. Nyla flew to Hartford on a Sunday. She had not been on an airplane in 2 years. She had packed a small carry-on, 2 shirts, a pair of black pants, a sweater her mother had bought for her when she was 22 that she had not been able to throw away. She had worn on the plane a dark blue dress that Hank had driven her to Kohl's to buy the day before. Hank had sat in the car while she shopped. He had given her $100 from the register and refused to take it back. She landed at Bradley International at 2 in the afternoon. She took a taxi to a hospice in West Hartford, a low brick building set back from the road with a garden in front and a porch that wrapped around the building on 3 sides. She'd been told by her mother's attorney that Eleanor had checked herself out of home care 2 weeks earlier against her husband's wishes. She had driven herself in her own car to this hospice. She had told the intake nurse that she wanted to die somewhere that did not have her husband's name on the door. Nyla had not known her mother had owned a car. She signed in at the front desk. The nurse, a heavy-set black woman in pink scrubs, looked at her name on the clipboard, then up at her face and said, "Baby, she has been waiting for you." "Is she?" "She's lucid. She's on morphine, but she's lucid. She made me promise to cut her back today so she could see you clear." Nyla had put her hand on the counter to steady herself. Room 12, the nurse said. End of the hall. Take your time, sweetheart. The hallway was long, carpeted in soft green, with prints of flowers on the walls. Nyla walked it slowly. She felt with every step 2 people walking at once. The woman she was now, a waitress with a jar of tip money on her counter, and the girl she had been, an 11-year-old who used to sit on the floor of the music room while her mother practiced Chopin. She stopped outside room 12. She knocked once. A voice she would have known in any life said, "Come in, my love." Eleanor Halbrook had lost weight. She had lost so much weight that the first thing Nyla felt was a raw animal instinct to cross the room and pick her up. Her mother was propped up on pillows. Her grey hair, which had always been swept into a chignon, was down around her shoulders, thin and silver and soft. Her eyes were her eyes. Nothing had taken them yet. Nyla stood in the doorway. Eleanor said, "Come here, Nyla. Come sit." Nyla crossed the room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She took her mother's hand, which was smaller than she remembered, and so thin the tendons showed. Eleanor looked at her for a long time. She said, "You look like yourself." Nyla had not expected that. "I have," Eleanor said, "been so proud of you for 2 years every day. I was proud of you the night you left. I am proud of you now. I wanted to say it to your face." Nyla started crying. No, Eleanor said. "Listen, we don't have a lot of time and I don't want to spend it crying. I want to spend it talking." Nyla wiped her face. Eleanor said, "He's going to come after you now. I heard. I made a nurse read me the news this morning." "What news?" "There is a reporter who has been making calls. My attorney told me, not a public story yet, a story coming. I know what it means." "Mama." "Listen, there is one more thing. In the drawer of that table, a white envelope." Nyla opened the drawer. There was an envelope. She took it out. Her name was written on the front in her mother's handwriting. "It's a letter," Eleanor said. "In my hand. I wrote it a week ago. It says in my own words that he made me sign 3 filings without letting me read them. It names the dates. It names the filings. It is signed and dated and witnessed by 2 of the nurses. If your reporter needs it, if the SEC needs it, if anyone needs it, it is the truest thing I have ever written." Nyla held the envelope against her chest. "Mama." "I should have left him," Eleanor said. "A long time ago. I did not have your courage. I want you to know that I know that. I am not dying ashamed, but I am dying sorry. Those are different things. I want you to remember the difference. You were brave. I was quiet. That is not the same. Do not get them confused." Eleanor's eyes closed for a moment, then opened. "Tell me about the diner." Nyla told her for an hour. About Hank, about Marcus, about Ava, about the apartment above the laundromat, about Miss Ruth at the library, about the jar on the counter. Eleanor listened. She smiled sometimes. Once she laughed. At the end she said, "Marcus, is he a good man?" "Yes." "Good. Bring him to see me if there is time." "There isn't going to be time." "I know. I just wanted you to say it out loud. Now I have heard it. It is enough." Nyla stayed 4 more hours. Eleanor died 9 days later at 2 in the morning with a night nurse holding her hand. The nurse called Nyla at 2:18 a.m. on a Tuesday. Nyla did not go to the funeral. Richard had controlled the guest list. She read in the obituary that Eleanor was survived by her husband. There was no mention of a daughter. Nyla had expected that. She put the envelope in a fireproof safe Marcus had bought for his apartment, and she closed the door. Richard Halbrook hosted a private dinner at the Greenwich Country Club on a Thursday night in late November. 30 investors, white tablecloths, scotch on the rocks, a 4-course meal plated, a string quartet in the corner playing softly. The purpose of the evening was to preview the Halbrook Industries IPO with the firm's closest backers. The story Richard was telling was a story about legacy. 40 years of quiet work, a Connecticut family business going public.
A founder's last great act. There was a seat at the head table for his daughter. The seat was empty. He had told guests when asked that she was unavoidably detained. He had said it with a small pained smile that suggested more than it said. He was a father. He was sorry about it. The guests, who were businessmen, nodded politely and moved on. At 8:15, as the salad course was being cleared, 3 people walked into the dining room together. The first was Peter Brennan, the Hartford Courant reporter, in a wrinkled suit and a press badge on a lanyard around his neck. The second was Terence Wade, the forensic accountant, in a grey suit that did not wrinkle. The third was a woman Richard did not recognize, but whose navy blue SEC enforcement badge was visible on her belt. Her name was Denise Hoffman. She had spent 3 years preparing for a moment she had not known would come on a Thursday night at a Connecticut country club. But when Yvonne Price had called her 2 weeks earlier with what Yvonne had, Denise had cleared her calendar. They did not cause a scene. Peter walked up to Richard's table. He identified himself. He said that the Hartford Courant would be running a story in the Sunday edition about offshore holdings in Halbrook Industries that had not been disclosed in the firm's most recent filings. He said he was prepared to read aloud to the room a statement from the widow. Well, not widow, but soon-to-be widow. Her illness was a matter of public record, describing 3 specific filings she had signed under duress. He said he was giving Richard the opportunity to comment on the story before it ran. Richard had not answered. Terence had stepped forward and introduced himself, and placed on the table in front of Richard a 3-page document summarizing in plain language the contents of the offshore accounts and the dates on which they had been moved. Denise had not spoken at first. She had simply stood behind them, and her badge had been visible, and that had been enough. The string quartet had stopped playing. The table of 30 investors had stopped eating. Richard Halbrook had sat very still in a suit that cost more than the annual rent on the studio apartment above the laundromat, and he had understood with the clarity of a man who had controlled information for 40 years that he no longer controlled it. He had said quietly, "I have no comment." Peter had said, "I'm sorry to do this in a public setting, sir. I called your office 3 times this afternoon. I have no comment. Thank you for your time." They had left. The dinner had gone on technically. The 3rd course had been served. Conversation had resumed in a lower register. 2 of the investors had made polite excuses and left before dessert. 3 more had left after. Marcus Ellis was not at the dinner. He was in his apartment in sweatpants reading Ava, the 4th chapter of a book about a girl who ran away and joined the circus because Ava had decided that was her favorite book that week. When he finished the chapter, he closed the book and kissed Ava on the forehead and turned off her lamp. He did not know that night what had happened in Greenwich. He would not know until the next morning. But he had chosen to be there on his couch with his daughter at exactly that moment. And he would come to understand later that this had been the right place for him to be. The story broke on Sunday morning. It was front page of the Hartford Courant, below the fold in the New York Times by Monday. By Tuesday, it was in every financial publication in the country. The headlines varied. Halbrook Industries IPO in jeopardy as offshore holdings revealed. Coerced signatures alleged in billion-dollar Connecticut firm. Billionaire's estranged daughter emerges as key figure. Nyla had not been named in the first story. Peter Brennan had protected her. Because he was a good reporter who understood that the story was the documents and the filings, not the daughter. But by Wednesday, Nyla had been identified in a follow-up. The story had become about her anyway. The prodigal daughter who had carried the papers for 2 years, the waitress in upstate New York, the black daughter of a white billionaire. It was, as reporters sometimes called it, a story. 2 of Halbrook Industries board members resigned on Tuesday. A 3rd resigned on Wednesday. The IPO was postponed indefinitely on Thursday. By the end of the following week, the SEC had opened a formal investigation. The investigation would take, Yvonne had said, 18 months, maybe 2 years. These things did.
But the moment the investigation was announced, Richard Halbrook's phone stopped ringing. That was the part Richard had not seen coming. He had built a 40-year empire on the telephone, on the fact that senators took his calls, that judges knew his name, that the men who could have made problems for him had for decades chosen not to. Because the return on making problems for Richard Halbrook had always been bad. He had understood power as a set of doors that opened for him. The doors did not open anymore. He was not arrested. He was not immediately bankrupted. He still had, when the dust of the first month settled, a fortune most people would kill for. He had not lost the suits or the house or the staff. What he had lost was the one thing he had spent his life building, which was the phone calls. In upstate New York on the Friday after the first story broke, the county health inspector's office issued a short letter to Hank's diner. The letter said that on review, the cited violations from October had been found either unsubstantiated or minor, and that no further action would be required. Hank read the letter in his office at 7:30 in the morning with Nyla standing in the doorway, and he did not say anything at all. He folded the letter in half. He put it in his desk drawer. Then he walked out to the counter and poured 2 cups of coffee. And he and Nyla drank them together without speaking. On the following Monday, Marcus received a second letter from the VA. The letter said that the administrative review of his disability rating had been closed. Full benefits would be restored. Back payments for the months affected would be issued within 30 days. The letter did not explain what had prompted the review, or what had ended it. It did not need to. On the Wednesday after that, Kimberly Ortiz, the social worker, called Marcus to tell him that the file on Ava had been closed. She said, "Mr. Ellis, I want to tell you unofficially that I am glad to make this call." Marcus said, "Thank you, ma'am." She said, "She is a remarkable child." "I know, ma'am." "Goodbye, Mr. Ellis." "Goodbye." He hung up. He went into the living room where Ava was sitting on the rug coloring a horse, and he sat down next to her, and he said, "Baby, we're going to be okay." And she said without looking up, "I knew we were, Daddy." Nyla did not celebrate. On the morning the IPO postponement was announced, she went to work at 6 the way she always had. She opened the diner. She made the coffee. She checked the salt shakers. She rolled the silverware. Hank came in at 6:30. Customers came in at 7. At 11, during a slow moment, Nyla sat in the back booth with a fresh cup of coffee. She took out the letter her mother had written. She had read it twice already. She had not read it since Eleanor had died. She read it again, sitting in the booth by the window, in the diner where she had built a life her mother had never seen. She read in her mother's handwriting the 3 dates, the 3 filings. The sentence near the bottom that said, "I signed these without reading them because my husband told me to. I have always known they were wrong. I am sorry." She read the last line, which said, "Tell my daughter she was the only thing I ever made that I was not afraid of." She folded the letter. She put it back in the envelope. She sat there for a long time. Marcus came in at 11:30. He sat down across from her. He did not say anything. He just sat. Ava came in at 11:45. Let in by Hank, who had her on Wednesdays now because Marcus sometimes had physical therapy, and Ava liked the diner anyway. Ava slid into the booth next to Nyla. She opened her notebook. She was drawing a horse. It had 4 legs this time. Marcus looked at it. He said, "What changed?" Ava said, "I didn't want to rush her." Nyla put her hand over her mouth. Ava did not look up. She kept drawing. Outside, the sky was white. Snow was starting to fall. The first snow of the year. Small flakes drifting past the window without making any sound. Hank came over with a pot of coffee. He refilled Nyla's cup and Marcus's. He stood there for a second looking at the 3 of them. He did not say anything. Then he went back to his counter. The slow hammer had fallen. Nobody had thrown a punch. Nobody had gone to jail, not yet and possibly never. The investigations would grind on for years. The lawyers would make their fees. Some things would be settled, others would not be. Justice as it comes to men like Richard Halbrook is rarely clean. But the IPO was dead. The phone calls had stopped. The daughter he had tried to own had not come home. And in a diner in a town he had never heard of, the name of 4 people were drinking coffee on a Wednesday morning at the end of November. The snow was coming down, and Ava was drawing a horse with 4 legs, because she had decided today that she had time. A year later, on a Tuesday morning in October, Nyla Brown unlocked the front door of Hank's diner at 5:30 the way she had for 3 years. She was 32 now. Hank had made her co-manager in January, a move he had announced by slapping a nameplate on the counter that read N. Brown Manager, and refusing to discuss a raise because he said they would figure it out. They had. She made a little more now. Enough for a small apartment of her own on the ground floor of a house on a quieter street, with a yard where she had started a vegetable garden. Ava was 10. She was still drawing horses, but she had also started writing small stories in the back of her notebook. Stories about a girl who could hear what buildings were saying. Because Ava had decided this was a superpower that was underappreciated. She was taller, she had 1 loose tooth, she had made the school choir. Marcus was 47. His VA benefits were stable. He had started volunteering at a veterans center in the next town over. 2 afternoons a week, mostly listening to men who needed to be listened to. His left hand still trembled sometimes, but not as often. He had gained 7 pounds. Nyla had noticed and had told him it looked good. They were not married. They were not, in the language of magazines, dating. They were something quieter and more durable than that. Marcus came to the diner on Tuesdays and Thursdays and most Saturdays. Nyla came to Marcus's apartment for dinner on Sundays. Ava had taken in the spring to calling her Miss Nyla, which had over the summer shortened to Miss N, and which last week for the first time had just been Nyla, without warning, on a Wednesday evening, over spaghetti. Marcus had looked up. Nyla had kept her face very still and kept eating. She had cried in her car on the way home. On this Tuesday morning at 7:30, Marcus came in with Ava. They sat at the booth by the window. Their booth. Nyla saw them come in. She poured 3 cups of coffee, her own included, and walked over with the pot. She sat down across from Ava. She put her own cup in front of her. Hank behind the counter did not say anything. He never did. On Tuesday mornings for 20 minutes, Nyla Brown sat with Marcus and Ava Ellis and drank coffee, and Hank ran the counter alone, and nobody bothered them. Ava was working on a new horse. Marcus was reading the paper. Nyla was watching the snow, which had started early this year. A light dusting on the ground outside a week before Halloween. She thought sometimes about her father. She did not think about him often, but sometimes. He was still technically a wealthy man. He was still technically the founder of Halbrook Industries, but the firm had been broken up over the course of the year. The infrastructure subsidiaries sold off. The bank spun into a separate entity. The holding company itself dissolved in a settlement that had ended the worst of the SEC matter without an indictment. He lived now in a smaller house. He was 70, going on 71. He had not called her again. She did not know if she would answer if he did. She thought she would one day, at least once, to hear his voice, to say goodbye to a version of a father she had stopped grieving but not stopped remembering. But not yet. Ava finished her horse. She held it up. "Look, Nyla." The horse had 4 legs. The mane was red. The background was a field of snow. "It's for you," Ava said. "For me. It's your birthday." Nyla had forgotten. Hank had not. Marcus had not. But Nyla had. And she laughed. A laugh that was loud enough for the whole diner to hear. And Ava grinned.
Because Ava had known Nyla would forget, which is why she had drawn the horse. Marcus reached across the table and took Nyla's hand. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Some of us spend our lives running from the families we were given, hoping the ones we find along the way will be brave enough to stand next to us when the old ones come looking. Nyla Brown learned over 2 long years of hiding and 1 short morning of refusing to hide anymore. That family is not the name on your birth certificate. It is the people who stand up from their breakfast when you need them. Marcus Ellis learned after a lifetime of believing his usefulness had ended the day his Humvee flipped that a man can come home from a war and still be called up to fight the quietest, most important battle of his life. The one where a child says she needs help, Daddy. And he has to decide if he is still the kind of man he trained himself to be. And Ava Ellis learned nothing at all. Because Ava Ellis had always known. She had known from the first Tuesday she had looked up at a tired waitress and said the truth. She had known that some people carry heavy things you cannot see, and that the right answer when you see them is not to look away. If this story moved you, please subscribe our channel and leave a comment below. There are more stories like this one on the way. Stories about ordinary people who become extraordinary at exactly the moment someone needs them. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.